Resident Evil 4 Remake released to universal praise from critics and fans alike. Even though I gave it a 9 in my XboxEra review, there's no denying the game had some issues, especially with the analog stick dead zone. I actually started working on an analysis video, but due to personal obligations, I only had a handful of days with the Series X version before Capcom dropped update 1.0.4.0. So how does this update compare on the Series X versus the launch version? And how does the Series S version stack up with this latest patch? Keep watching to find out.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
I think the best place to start is with image quality. The game runs at the same 1800p resolution in frame rate mode and 4K in the resolution mode on the Series X, while the Series S renders the game at 1080p in frame rate mode and 1440p in resolution mode, with all modes using a form of checkerboard reconstruction. Despite pixel counts remaining the same, the image quality is taking a clear hit, with more shimmering and aliasing artifacts than we had before. It looks like the temporal anti-aliasing has been tweaked to be less aggressive, possibly due to fewer samples being used. The end result is a noisier picture quality, especially with hair and foliage in the game. I would actually prefer Capcom reverse this, as the game was more temporally stable at launch. The next change I noticed was the drop in quality with the depth of field. This effect now seems far less refined and reminds me of the depth of field we typically saw during the Xbox 360 generation. I'm not entirely sure why this change was made, since it's mostly used during cinematics, and any impact to performance is less detrimental when the player is no longer controlling the action on screen. This issue is present in both the Series X and Series S versions of the game. Again, I'm hoping Capcom changes this to the way it was before. Now, I'm not sure if this is a bug, but it also appears that the screen space reflections have been removed from the game and replaced with the cube map. The reason why I wonder if this might be a bug is because I was able to find an area where the screen space reflections are present, but only on the Series S. While the original implementation of this technique was far from perfect and suffered from occlusion artifacts, I'm not sure this change was for the better. Ray trace reflections appear to be unchanged, so for those that want more accurate reflections, you still have that as an option. Draw-in and texture pop-in seem to be roughly similar to how it was in the launch version on the Series X, with some scenes actually showing the detailed textures popping in slightly quicker than it did at launch. Speaking of draw-in and textures, this is where the Series S version really falls apart. As I previously mentioned, I only had time with the Series X version before this update was released, so unfortunately I don't have any footage of the launch version on Microsoft's little white console. However, I'd be surprised if the draw-in was anywhere as bad as it is now. The highest quality mesh seems to load in just feet in front of the player and is a constant distraction. Another eyesore is the issue with textures fully loading on the Series S. More often than not, it seems like the textures never fully load, and when they do, they are still prone to pop in and out. These texture issues appear to be more frequent when playing in the game's resolution mode, but it's a major issue no matter how you play. There were plenty of times where the game reminded me of a Dreamcast game due to how blurry the textures were. I'm not sure if this update has introduced an issue with memory management, but this really needs to be corrected, as the game now is pretty much broken, at least visually. Now, I know it seems like the update is all bad, but I still think RE4 looks great, at least on the Series X, and thankfully the dead zone issue has been corrected. The game now feels similar to other Resident Evil remakes and plays a lot better. Moving on to performance, the game supports a number of settings on the Series X, including the option to prioritize frame rate or resolution, enabling hair strands to replace the traditional card-based hair system, and turning on ray tracing. Each feature does have a performance cost, so the game will be less likely to hit 60 frames per second if you target a higher resolution while enabling hair strands and ray tracing. Thankfully, this new update does improve performance, so players now have more wiggle room to enable some of these features. The frame rate mode alone will hit its target the vast majority of the time, and this update has ironed out most of the scenarios where we would typically see a dip. There is one scenario where performance is still a problem, but we'll touch on that in a bit. Enabling hair strands or ray tracing in the performance mode can cause the frame rate to drop depending on what's rendered on screen. Turning on both features is a great way to stress the engine, and here we see an average of 5 to 10 frames advantage in the newest update. Overall, the performance in frame rate mode is excellent. That is, outside of one specific area where the game would originally run between the high 30s to 40s, but now runs between the low 40s and mid 50s. While not perfect, it's a welcome improvement and shouldn't be an issue for anyone playing on a VRR capable display. Resolution mode on the Series X sees a similar 5 to 10 frame improvement. This mode now runs closer to how the launch build ran in frame rate mode and does a pretty good job at hitting the 60 frame per second target. I noticed smaller gains with performance in resolution mode when enabling all the settings, but we still see around a 5 frame per second improvement, and the game should now do a better job staying within that VRR window. When we look at that demanding scene in resolution mode, the performance is now comparable to how the frame rate mode used to run at launch. So how about the Series S? We unfortunately have less control over the graphical settings on the budget console. The hair strands feature is cut entirely, and while ray tracing is enabled in the resolution mode, it's not a feature we can turn off to improve performance in this higher fidelity mode. As I mentioned before, I didn't get to record any footage of the launch build on the Series S, so unfortunately I don't have anything to compare it to, but looking at how the game runs now, it's pretty solid. The frame rate mode does a great job hitting the 60 frame per second goal, though we do see more dips than what we saw on the Series X. Resolution mode can run between 15 to 20 frames worse, and there's a higher chance RE4 will fall outside the VRR window when using this mode. Looking at the scenario in the range shows the Series S dropping below 30 frames per second in resolution mode, while hovering around the mid-40s in the frame rate mode. Because of this, it would be nice if Capcom added the option to cap the frame rate to 30 frames per second for those that prefer a more consistent experience when playing in higher resolutions with ray tracing. Overall, I'm pretty mixed on this update. The game runs better and the controls are more responsive, both contributing to a more enjoyable experience. However, the downgrade in image quality and depth of field, removal of screen space reflections, and especially the pop-in issues on the Series S result in a less polished and impressive looking game at the end of the day. Like I mentioned before, the game is just visually broken on the Series S. At the very least, I hope Capcom can address the texture and geometry pop-in issues on the Series S. My overall preference would be for the developers to also improve the image quality and depth of field back to what we saw at launch. Regarding the screen space reflections, it would be nice if they added the additional option to enable or disable that feature for those that were bothered by the occlusion artifacts. It's safe to say the game still needs at least one more patch. And considering how well the game sold, I hope they are paying attention to the feedback and come through with an update that will provide the ultimate experience for all players. As usual, thank you for watching. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And definitely tune in for more Xbox content.